Hey there, good evening. Nice to see you. It's time for the Bronx Buzz. You may or may not know this is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters, writers, editors, journalists, all different people. And you can find out what they're writing about and what they're thinking about when they write about New York City and the borough of the Bronx. And in our second segment, the people at the Friendly Fridge, the Friendly Fridge that helps feed people who need food, they are doing something artistic. And we're going to talk about that and show that off a little bit. But right now, let's say good evening to my buddy Jeanmarie Evelly, who is the City Limits executive editor. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you for having me, Gary. Great to be here.
I love it when royalty comes to the program, and you as an executive editor are that. Let's just start with City Limits. I've been reading it every edition, every day, every year, and tell us where we're at. It's a not-for-profit, right? And you provide some wonderful and important information.
Yeah, well, thank you for reading, Gary. We appreciate it, and we appreciate always having our reporters on as well. So for those of you who don't know, City Limits is a nonprofit newsroom that was actually founded in 1976, originally to cover housing issues in the city. It was originally actually a newsletter for housing organizers at the time when the city was in fiscal crisis and many neighborhoods had been abandoned and there were a lot of vacant lots and things like that. And we have evolved a lot over the many decades since then. We just celebrated our 47th anniversary last year.
47th, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that it was way back in the 70s.
Yeah, we've been around a really long time, which is incredible. It's always great.
And in those days, was it a paper? Because obviously we didn't have
it was a very informal newsletter, really, for tenant organizers and folks working in the housing world to, reclaim a lot of like the vacant lots and buildings that had been abandoned in all the boroughs, including the Bronx. And it has evolved and had many iterations. And we, over the past several years, have really kind of recommitted our efforts to covering housing and homelessness in New York City. And those are sort of our core areas. But we also write about climate change, land use, and generally kind of anything else happening in New York City. But those are our main areas.
The main thing, people go to citylimits.org and you can find out more, and you can also inform yourself about what's going on in the city and in the borough of the Bronx. You do a great job, Jeanmarie, but then every now and then you write your own pieces, and you did write something I thought was fascinating. That we know it happened. You start to wonder what is the effect of these things, and then of course now city council members are taking action or trying to take action, and that is Mayor Adams, and this was partially in response to the migrant situation that New York was getting so many thousands of migrants. They instituted a 30 and 60-day deadline for how long you could stay in a shelter. That has created a problem and created some concern, and people want to roll back that requirement. That's my very, very spare explanation. Explain to us what the heck is going on.
Yeah, so as you said, this is something that has been ongoing for certain parts of folks in the shelter system since last summer. Essentially, Adams for the first time started instituting time limits for newly arrived immigrants in the city shelter system. As a lot of people know, the city has been struggling to sort of keep up and find space for folks, and they say that they have limited resources. So this was sort of a policy that the Adams administration has said is a way to make sure that they can manage people in the shelter system and make sure that there's adequate space for them. But as you noted, it's been very controversial. And essentially, most adults are subject now, and there are specific rules. So this is specifically for migrants or folks who are new to the country. There are specific dates, I believe, in the latest right to shelter settlement. It's like if you've arrived in New York City after, I want to say, 2022. Adults are mostly, for the most part, subject to now 30-day shelter limits. And families with children are subject to 60-day limits. They can reapply. Families with children can reapply for a new placement at the end of their 60 days. But even that, advocates have criticized and legal service providers have criticized, is really disruptive to families.
I got to ask you this before we even break down, what what might happen or what should happen, where do those people go? I thought the whole idea, forgive my naivete, but I thought the whole idea was to take people off the streets, and even if they are not, ready to work or whatever it is, at least give them a place so they're not back on the streets. Seems to me if you end their ability to stay in the shelter, you're just kind of recycling the problem and never ending it. Now I realize, you can't always end poverty and all many of the other issues, but this seems like regression rather than progression.
Yeah, well, for many years,
Help.
for decades, New York City is really unique in a lot of ways in that it has had what's called a right to shelter, and this was something that was established many decades ago. I think it was I forget the year off the top of my head, but I want to say in the early 80s. That basically guarantees if someone doesn't have a place to stay and they need a place to stay, New York City has to provide them with a bed at least temporarily. And this is something that the Adams administration, City Hall, has been trying to basically amend, and they did amend at least temporarily, citing the kind of emergency situation, as they've said, this spring with a legal settlement. And where people go is a great question. We don't totally know. Based on our reporting, they go to a variety of places. As I said, families with children can reapply for a shelter placement, so they may remain in the shelter system in a lot of cases. But we've also heard from folks who, are going to doubling up in places, living with friends. One of my reporters spoke to folks who were paying hundreds of dollars a month to rent a couch from somebody in their living room. So people are really doing what they have to do. And to your point, advocates for homeless New Yorkers do say that inevitably this means some folks are ending up on the streets because they don't have any other options. But there's a lot of unknowns, I think.
I'm trying to figure it out. I mean, so basically you take them off the subways, people who are mentally ill, they're taking them off. And then there's a lot of concern. This is a whole other issue. There's a lot of concern about those people being treated for maybe 15 minutes and then say, okay, you're not in the subways, but now you're out. And that doesn't seem to help. And then if you got people and you do get them into a shelter, I mean, whether it be the heat or the cold weather or whatever it is, you get them off the streets and you put them in a shelter. And then in 30 days, you're like, you gotta go. It just seems to me we're not getting anywhere. And so now there's this Intro 210, which would prohibit the city from putting time limits on homeless shelter stays. Where is that at? Do you think the city council is going to pass it and make it veto proof? I mean, I don't know where we're at with this thing.
Yeah, so this is a bill that was introduced actually earlier this year by Brooklyn Council member Shahana Hanif. And it would, as you said, basically prohibit any city social services agency, in this case it would be the Department of Social Services, from instituting any type of shelter deadline on New Yorkers in the system. We haven't seen it move yet. We did ask the council speaker's office for comment on the bill. They said that they're letting the legislative process kind of play out, which doesn't really tell us much. But that is one proposal that's been there because, as you said, there's been a lot of criticism that 30 days just is not enough time to kind of get back on your feet.
Yeah. So let's see, at least according to your reporting, 19 of the 51 council members had signed on to it. I have great sympathy, certainly, for the city because, especially inundated with migrants. And of course, that has slowed down considerably. But then I see stories like the one that I read even today in City Limits about that people, where do they get their mail? Especially if in 30 days they're put out somewhere and the mail goes to the shelter, and then that complicates maybe their legal matters, the various legal situations that they're in, whether it be housing court or other legal issues that they have, or anything. You get your healthcare bill in the mail or your healthcare cards in the mail. That complicates it. And then the other thing I read was that the shelters are, especially during this summer, as hot as the furnaces. And so that's a problem. I'm trying to help solve these problems. I can't sort it out. How do you think this is going to play? Do you get the sense that city council members are going to say, yeah, we like Intro 210, and then force the city to figure it out a little deeper? Or are they going to say, we understand this DHS has a problem? I don't know.
I'm not sure either. It's always kind of hard to say what's going to happen with a given bill. As you said,
Right.
at the time that I had written about this story, which was a couple weeks ago, there were 19 sponsors. Whether or not more people will sign on kind of remains to be seen. And the Adams administration has argued that they are providing case management and other resources to help people sort of take the next steps in their journeys, which is the language that the mayor has used. But critics would say that, in a lot of ways, these shelter deadlines, shuffling people around every month or two, is a bit of a catch-22 and actually works against those goals, right? It makes it harder for people to find stability. As you noted, it makes it harder for folks to, for example, get their work authorization if their address is changing every month, right?
And I find it, again, if you are a homeless person and you've been sleeping somewhere, I mean, we see them all over the place. We understand how difficult that situation is. And then the city takes you off the street because they don't want you on the street, and then puts you in a shelter, but then says, you got to go. It's like, I'd like to help. Then, of course, and then this is a much larger thing, and we talked about it with a reporter last week. The mayor then says, well, I've created the city of yes, so we can have more housing and ultimately put these people in housing. On the other hand, there's a question of city of yes with affordability. Is there going to be build affordable housing? On that note, we got about a minute left. What do your reporters say and find about not only the city of yes, but the notion of affordable housing? Can we use housing stock? I know there was a movement to open up former hotels that are now empty. Just what's your sense about the city's efforts to build new affordable housing?
I mean, the feeling is, and as you noted, City of Yes is working through the public review right now, and there are folks who land on kind of every side of City of Yes. There are people who are very opposed to it and very uncomfortable with the idea of building more housing in every neighborhood. But generally, the city really does need more housing. It also needs to think of creative solutions. I think it's kind of an all hands on deck situation at this point. Last year, the city had the lowest vacancy rate, which is basically the number of apartments that were available for rent hit a historic low. It was the lowest rate that it's ever been since 1968. So
that's good news.
There isn't a lot of housing out there.
Right.
So we need more options.
So this is what we're going to do. We're going to keep relying on City Limits to tell the stories, to give us the information, and then we'll call you and your colleagues back here on the Bronx Buzz to talk about it. Does that work?
Anytime. Of course.
Jeanmarie Evelly, she is the executive editor of the wonderful, very important citylimits.org. Thank you so much for your time. And we will pick up the phone and call you again, guaranteed.
Please do. I appreciate it. Thank you, Gary.
Okay. Thank you. Take a short break. And then, as I said, it's the Friendly Fridge, and they're doing more than just a fridge. We'll be right back.